Hello, I'm Cara Dahl Russell. In 2017, I had the great pleasure of doing a pre-concert lecture for a concert of the Mid-Atlantic Symphony Orchestra that included Antonio Vivaldi's most famous composition, The Four Seasons. So now I'd like to share with you a bit of the biography of Vivaldi, and of course, at the end of this video, there will be a link to hear a performance of this work. And because it is so frequently performed, within the text below the video, I will include other links to performances by various groupings of orchestras so that you can hear and compare how the work sounds when played in different combinations and on different instruments. Antonio Vivaldi lived from 1678 until 1741. Born Antonio Lucio Vivaldi, we now consider him to be one of the big names, a composer and violinist who left an indelible mark on concerto form and especially the style of late Baroque chamber music. Vivaldi's main teacher was probably his father, Giovanni Battista, who was admitted in 1685 as violinist to the orchestra of the San Marco Basilica in Venice. Antonio, his eldest child, trained for the priesthood and was ordained in 1703. His distinctive reddish hair would later earn him the sobriquet Il Prete Rosso, the Red Priest. He made his first known public appearance playing alongside his father in the Basilica as a supernumerary violinist in 1696 at age 17. First known public appearance is the important phrase. It was a mark of achievement to be considered good enough to play there. So to play there at 17, he may not have been a prodigy, but he certainly was accomplished. He became known as an excellent violinist, and 4 years later, in 1703, age 21, he was appointed violin master at the Ospedale della Pietà, a home for foundlings. The Pietà specialized in the musical training of its female wards, and those with musical aptitude were assigned to its excellent choir and orchestra, whose much praised performances assisted the institution's quest for donations and legacies. Vivaldi held some position or composing work with the Pietà for most of his career, from the age of 22 until his death. The more biographies you read about Vivaldi, the more contradictory the assumptions about his personal life. Fact: we know he was ordained as a priest. Speculation: some biographers say this was only pro forma and point to his not celebrating Mass. They infer that he did not have deep religious feelings. Fact: more biographers acknowledge that his reason for not saying Mass was breathing problems, something like chronic asthma. With the absence of microphones and the sensors of smoke, these would be prohibitive to someone who has suffered with chronic asthma all of his life. They also note that he not only took his duties as a priest seriously, but that he had the reputation of being very severe. Some even called him a religious bigot. That is a comment of contemporaries. Contemporary reputation. So, quasi-fact. Vivaldi's earliest musical compositions date from his first years at the Pietà in 1713, when the Pietà's choir master left his post and the institution had to turn to Vivaldi and other composers for new compositions. He achieved great success with his sacred vocal music, for which he later received commissions from other institutions. Another new field of endeavor for him opened in 1713, when his first opera, Ottone in Villa, was produced in Vicenza. I will toss in here, I do not speak Italian, and other than knowing musical phrases, I'm guessing quite a bit on Italian pronunciation, so if you do speak Italian well, please forgive me. Returning to Venice, Vivaldi immediately plunged into operatic activity in the twin roles of composer and impresario, producer. From 1718 to 1720, he worked in Mantua as director of secular music for that city's governor, Prince Philip of Hesse-Darmstadt. Fact: this was the only full-time secular post Vivaldi ever held. Speculation: historians infer that he preferred life as a freelance composer for the flexibility and entrepreneurial opportunities it offered. Vivaldi's major compositions in Mantua were operas, though he also composed cantatas and instrumental works. The 1720s were the zenith of Vivaldi's career. Based once more in Venice, but frequently traveling elsewhere, he supplied instrumental music to patrons and customers throughout Europe. His early works and collections were published by a Dutch publishing company, Etienne Roger. After 1729, Vivaldi stopped publishing his works, finding it more profitable to sell them in manuscript to individual purchasers. This is important to remember when we look at the period when his work became unknown. The lack of traditional publication makes works much harder to unearth because they have to have been kept for centuries in a collection, been kept safe, and then have to be, quote, discovered, unquote. But during his lifetime, he was exceedingly influential. His concerti were taken as models of form by many late Baroque composers, including Johann Sebastian Bach, who transcribed 10 of them for keyboard instruments. In 1726, the contralto Anna Giro sang for the first time in a Vivaldi opera. Born in Mantua around 1711, she had gone to Venice to further her career as a singer. Historical record: her voice was not strong, but she was attractive and acted well. She became part of Vivaldi's entourage and the indispensable prima donna of his subsequent operas. After Vivaldi's death, she continued to perform successfully in opera until quitting the stage in 1748 to marry a nobleman. Fact: Anna and her sister also lived with Vivaldi, and once again, biographers have differing inferences and speculation. Either she was his mistress, or both were. Or it was simply a convenient living arrangement for an unmarried priest-composer who needed household help, and a singer and her sister who were also de facto housekeepers. We must remember that growing up as a clerical composer and musician did not prepare him well for running his own household. We also have to remember another option that is rarely touched on. Vivaldi may not have been interested in women. Homosexuality was punishable by death, and we have ample historical evidence that one often used way to sweep this under the carpet was to join the clergy. During Vivaldi's lifetime, these things were rarely even whispered about. But if we are going to weigh various speculations, we would be remiss to not at least mention this as another speculative possibility. And equally, we have to consider something so obvious that most of us tend to forget it. He had taken vows as a priest. When we put this together with contemporaries thinking of him as a religious bigot, the most obvious answer to his private life may simply be that he respected his clerical vows. But the overriding fact we know is that we will never know definitively about his private life unless and until someone uncovers verifiable letters with definitive names and dates. For many composers, this lack of information on his personal life would be the ideal way to be remembered by history, because it means he is remembered for his work. It is interesting to know that his Spring from the Seasons was as popular when it was premiered as it is today, 2 generations later. Louis XV ordered it to be performed whenever he pleased. But then, tastes in music changed. Royal courts, where musical taste was being made, were certainly just as fickle as Hollywood is today. In the 1730s, Vivaldi's career gradually declined. Long before the birth of Mozart, Vivaldi's music was no longer fashionable. In addition to this, Vivaldi's attempts to shift into being a producer and impresario were also increasingly marked by failure, linked to the fact that Venice was at the time suffering a severe economic downturn. In 1740, he traveled to Vienna under the patronage of his admirer, Charles VI, but he fell ill and did not live to attend the production there of his opera L'Oracolo in Messenia, The Oracle in Messina, 2 years later. He died aged 62 on July 28, 1741, of what they called internal fire, probably the asthmatic bronchitis from which he suffered all of his life. If you suffer from bronchial asthma, as I do, you understand how people die from it. The simplicity of Vivaldi's funeral on July 28, 1741, suggests that he died in considerable poverty. After Vivaldi's death, his huge collection of musical manuscripts, consisting mainly of autograph scores of his own works, was bound into 27 large volumes. These were ultimately acquired by the patron of Christoph Willibald Gluck. Having fallen out of favor, he became a minor footnote, rarely mentioned in lists of great composers, even up through the 1960s. With a rediscovery of his manuscripts in the 1920s, these works today form part of the Foa and Giordano collections of the National Library in Turin. And this rediscovery of his work in the 1920s was a part of the first twinkling of the birth of the early music movement, which did not really take hold and gain acceptance until the late 1960s. So while Vivaldi's works were part of this slowly growing interest in early music and historical instruments and historically informed performance practice, his work did not reach full popularity again until Jean Cocteau used some of his works as the score for L'Enfant Terrible in 1950. And then the Four Seasons was used in the scores of Sweden's Elvira Madigan in 1967. And since then, his music has appeared in almost 500 films and television shows. By far the most popular and most frequently performed of his works is The Four Seasons. Each section of this piece of music is based on poetry, which appears in the score. This is programmatic music before there was even a term for it. Vivaldi's The Four Seasons. Enjoy.